Good morning, Mashi.
Good evening, Dennis. What's the word, man?
Well, it's your day. You tell me the word. The series of words, I
Well,
hope. One
it's
word quote. We haven't quite
words.
gotten there yet. Yeah.
It's words. And this one's weird. This goes back, and I know I've said this like a million times on this podcast, to perspective. And this is a quote that I heard for the first time. I mean, I don't know when the exact first time is, but it's certainly indelibly tied to my youth in the I guess late 80s, early 90s. This must be early 90s. This must be late early. Anyway,
So is this quote partially responsible? And I use the word responsible very carefully for the Mashi that I know today, because I got a bone to pick with it if that's the case.
No. That would be mainly Doctor Who quotes. This is not a Doctor Who quote. Not a Doctor Who quote. This is a classic, dude. Resistance is futile.
Okay.
Do you know what that's from?
Is that from Star Wars?
No. Close-ish.
Close-ish. I mean, Star Trek. That would be closer.
Star Trek. There you go, man. How do you not? You've never heard this quote before?
I mean, I've heard the quote. I've never heard it in context.
It's it's iconic. Well, so Picard tells Q, who's like a all-powerful being, we're prepared for anything. We don't need your help. And he goes, boom, sends them to encounter the Borg, which are basically space zombies. I don't know. You're familiar with the Borg. Right? They're space zombies. And that's their whole thing. Resistance is futile. They're going to assimilate you. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. And it's interesting because there's so many stages in human growth and development. I mean, personally, not as a species. And there's this way where, delivered by the Borg, it's like, hey, don't fight us. You're going to lose. Fighting isn't worthwhile. Fighting isn't worthwhile. And there's party that says, no, we're going to fight to our dying breath. We're fighting. We're going down swinging. And that's, I think that there's a lot to be said for that, and commendable.
Tenacity is admirable, right? Yeah.
And in that situation, I do the same. But when I start to turn inwards and I start to think about those inner storms that I'm dealing with, I do think resistance is futile. I think, like, don't be
this is the stoic in you speaking, I think.
It might be. Don't be the oak, be the willow. Don't be the oak. Don't try to stand up to the storm. Don't plant your roots and stand firmly there. Be the willow. Blow with the storms inside you. And I think that ultimately resistance is the opposite of acceptance. And again, when you're being assimilated by space zombies, okay.
I love that you take these quotes that are like, so like, it was highlighted perfectly there. Where you're like, when you have these inner troubles, sometimes you're doing more damage by swimming against the current than you would be by accepting it and learning from it. But if you're on a Borg cube ship and they want you to, it's like a whole other
fight. It's different. But it's
set phasers to love, Mashi.
Set course for love.
Yeah.
It's a matter of perspective, and it's certainly it's a way I never would have interpreted that quote. It's really never interpreted that quote until it came across my feed again, and I was like, oh my God. I started thinking about the things, particularly inside of us, because I do, and I've made mistakes. I've done terrible things. I've never killed anyone, I think, but I've done things I'm ashamed of and things I'm not proud of, and the way I dealt with that for many years was to lock it into a box and fight it. That's not me. That was a bad period. Oh, let me give you 1,000,001 excuses and reasons for why I did things I knew I shouldn't have been doing. And ultimately, I think that's all a form of resistance, because it is not accepting that, hey, yeah, I've made my mistakes. I've done my things. And you double down and triple down and quadruple down the longer you try to shove that down, and the more time you spend trying to resist it. And ultimately, it is a futile exercise. That is you. Those are the pieces of you. Resisting it doesn't do anything for you. I mean, it actually does. It does a tremendous amount of damage. I shouldn't say that. It does a tremendous amount of damage, but it doesn't accomplish the goals you want. And ultimately, it is a futile exercise, which is one of the things I've really come to understand about myself. When we project out to the business world, when we project out to the tides we're trying to navigate as a business, whether we're an established business or whether we're in new business. And of course, I'm very, even more so now, very interested in entrepreneurship than I have been historically. Resistance is, I think, a recipe for disaster. You need to know where things are going. You can get out in front of something, you can innovate, you can change the course of things, but resisting things. And this is something that I learned very much so when we were working together.
I have a prime example of this if you want.
Yeah. We had certain people in our company who were like, no. The community needs to snap too. They need to realize this. They need to do this. They need, they need to adjust this. And it's like, and as a young 2-3 years ago, I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. No, it doesn't. Listen to your customers. Your customers don't need to do anything. You need to do everything. And the more you try to fight and resist that tide, you're going to go down with the ship. So I think it is a wise person who knows both the external tides, and I'll use business as an example here, and the internal tides, and doesn't resist them, finds a way to flow with them. Now, there's also the other option, externally, not internally, of saying, okay, well, I'm charting different waters. I'm out of here. Recently, I think I mentioned this on the podcast. I'm not sure that I did. I've been going through The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Mm-hmm. And one of the key things that I'm reminded of over and over is that in every situation, you have 3 options. Exit the situation, work to change it, or embrace it unrelentingly, unapologetically, completely, wholly embrace it. That's it. Yeah, surrender to it. That's it. Those are your 3 options. And resistance isn't part of that. Working for change is not resistance. I don't think, that you're trying to grow it. You're not trying to fight it.
So everything we've said about, accepting your flaws and mistakes and, battling against them being a form of resistance that doesn't help you in the long run, I agree with. But if we're talking about battling it against an external force, the Borg in this case, that is, and I'm pretty sure they win in that episode, by the way, whatever, battling against an indomitable, inevitable force, right, where you are going to lose. How do you feel about fighting or resisting, in this case, on principle alone, in like a Pyrrhic, the opposite of, I guess, Pyrrhic defeat?
Yeah. I think that's ultimately at the end of the day. And this is true whether you want to make it internally or externally. It's about knowing who you are and what your values are. When I say surrender internally, by the way, I don't mean look at all the things you've done that are bad and go, I'm just a bad guy. I'm good with it. I don't think that's a path to growth or happiness. Ultimately, it's recognizing those things are bad, and you made mistakes, embracing them, but hopefully moving on to a better place. Now, that is ultimately an acknowledgement of who you are, of saying, I'm going to embrace who Mashi Scanlan is, who Denis Stranjak is. Internally, I'm going to do that, and I think the same is true if you want to go down swinging with an external force, because in those moments, win or lose, live or die, you want to go out with your boots on. I think you want to go out being who you are. And that may ultimately lead to your defeat. But I think it's the same thing no matter what. It's not about, resisting, because, if you fight who you are and become something you don't want to be and you aren't just to win, that's a form of resistance too. It is just about being true to yourself.
It's hard to know what you are, though, on the inside, right? That takes a lot of self-reflection,
I actually think it's not hard. It's impossible. I think that's one of those there's no destination. It's a journey things. You know what I mean? Checking in all the time, stopping there, saying, okay, what do I want? Who am I? Where am I going? These aren't questions that you're like, oh no, you know what? Fuck, I figured that out last Tuesday. Okay, next question. It doesn't work that way. And you want it to. I want it to. That's the story I want to tell. I'll harken back to our last, episode. That's the story I want. I think it's a story we all want, where, I know who I am. No, I think that the closest you can get to knowing who you are, because of this layer of mindfulness, because animals are intuitive, okay? And we still have that animal intuition inside of us, but we've layered all this cerebral nonsense on top of it to our benefit. I love it. I love reading. I love doing this podcast. I love
your hot take is your pro consciousness. That's like,
but well, yeah, exactly. But I think that it's not about knowing who you are. It's about engaging who you are, talking to yourself, listening
and accepting.
To yourself.
Accepting is what we're really talking about here, right? And surrendering is a negative word, but the opposite of resistance isn't surrender. The opposite of resistance can be acceptance and adaptability and embracing.
Is surrender a negative word?
I think so. I think it certainly has negative connotations. I mean, resistance does too, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I mean, we're talking about surrendering to yourself. We're talking about just saying, hey, you know what? I'm at war with myself. And I mean, you know what? We all have those voices.
Right. Who hasn't been?
I'll speak for myself. I'm at war with myself. Dude, that Under Armour, dude, your gut looks huge in that thing right now. Come on, man. You got 3 more sets than you. Let's go. Dude, it's 7 a.m. and you're still on the couch. You got laundry to do. You know, what are you doing, buddy? There's all these voices in ourselves that pick away at us. You know, she's not really in love with you. How could she be in love with you, man? Look at her. She's incredible. You know, all those things that start to chip away at who you are. And you go, dude, what the hell, man? Shut the fuck up. You know, and that's me talking to myself. That's us talking to ourselves, you know, and you start to think about how damaging that is. And that's the conversation. You're going to have a conversation with yourself. You are. We all do. Make it a good one. Make it one that's positive and really engage. Don't bully yourself. Don't pick on yourself. You know, and the advice, and I think we talked about this in the podcast, like, you know, I really do frame it like, what would I say to Dennis? If this was the voice in my mind, how would I say, oh, come on, Dennis?
Well, you unironically asked me that the other day about something. You were like, hey, what should I do about this? Well, if pretend I wasn't me, when I ask you about this, I was like, okay, well, and
it's really good. You know, that dialogue is huge because we are so kind and empathetic and caring of those around us. And we don't bring that into our conversation.
Don't deny yourself the same kindness you would give to other people, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, part of, I don't know if it's we feel like we don't deserve it, or we want to be honest with ourselves or gritty with ourselves. We lack the self-confidence to stand up to ourselves, which is just such a weird thing, but surrendering to this idea that you are loved, you're worthy of love, and all that care and empathy you put out in the world to other people, you deserve it too. And other people know that. We all care and love each other. And I go, God, Dennis deserves all the love and empathy in the world. But what about Mashi? Well, come on, man. You know, it only makes sense. But that's all. And so I think surrendering to that and surrendering to good things is important. And I mean, you're married. You want to, when you have a healthy partnership, you do surrender to that. You want, you know, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be angry and frustrated and upset and all those things, because that's what a partnership is. But we still fight against a lot of it. We still resist a lot of it. And ultimately, I think that there's something about the human condition that we're, you know, I don't know if it's fear or concern or a survival instinct that we do resist surrendering into that and not falling into that. And then, you know, that's all the personal side. The business side, right, is this idea of you have a vision, and by God, you know, the world is going to accept that vision, and you're going to keep pushing through. It's like, you got to evolve it. And think about that. For those who are like, okay, I don't want any of that hokey California Mashi internal BS. Think about business for a second. Think about the dialogue you want to have with your customers, internally with your business, and with the vision you have for what you're growing. If you say to yourself, no, this is our business. We send out DVDs through the mail and that's it. We're not changing it. That's who we are. We're Netflix. That's it. We're static. That's who we are. I know who we are now. And you don't evolve that conversation and go, ooh, internet, ooh, streaming. Ooh, what are we doing here? You know,
we're Channel Fireball. We saw Magic the Gathering cards. That's our game.
Well, you know, we sell content, you know, we run events now. But I mean, if you don't have that conversation and evolve your business, you're dead in the water. No, what business entity? I mean, Apple was a computer company. Now I think they're a freaking design company. Honestly, they are a marketing company that masquerades as tech. So, it's evolution and having that conversation about who we are constantly. And I think even asking the question, who am I, is probably damaging, or what are we is damaging. What conversation are we having today? Who are we talking to? Like it's because we are so focused on the journey. What's our business? And what's our business is important. Maybe the question is, what's our business today? Who am I today? Who am I right now? And we have, of course, there's a base that's unchanging, right? That's evolving slowly at the margins, but that core stays the same. And I think that's important. We're so far afield from resistance is futile.
That's okay. I hope you go into your day to day and you resist where appropriate and surrender where appropriate, because I think both.
It's surrender everywhere. It's appropriate.
Not surrender everywhere.
I'm saying over surrender, because our instinct is to resist. That's why I'm trying to overcompensate. You know what I mean?
I'm not so sure.
All right, Dennis, just remember, resistance is futile.
Sometimes.
Have a great evening.
Have a great morning.